The room was silent except for the soft humming of the old ceiling fan that spun lazily above rows of worn wooden desks. A single beam of sunlight leaked through the tall windows of the lecture hall, painting dust motes golden as they drifted in the still air. And at the center of it all, Daniel sat frozen with his fingers trembling above the glowing keyboard, his heart hammering so violently he thought everyone around him could hear it, because the professor had just dared him in front of the entire class to use artificial intelligence. For his next assignment, the words still echoed like a slap in his ears, ringing with a mix of insult and challenge, the professor's voice booming across the hall as he had said, "If you think you are clever enough to rely on machines, prove it. Use AI for your homework. Let us see how far your shortcuts take you." And the class had erupted into whispers and muffled laughter, some smirking, others shaking their heads, and Daniel had felt the burn of humiliation creep up his neck, not because of the dare itself, but because of the way the professor's eyes had narrowed with contempt, the way he had made Daniel feel like less than the others, like a fraud waiting to be exposed. Daniel was not like the rest of them. He carried burdens invisible to the room, the weight of expectations, the sting of constant doubt, the unspoken battle of proving himself in spaces that were never built for him. And in that moment, standing on the razor's edge between shame and defiance, he knew one thing with clarity: he could not back down. Not now, not ever. The next evening, he sat alone in his dorm room, the glow of the computer screen lighting the darkness like a spotlight, his phone buzzing with texts from classmates who wanted to know if he would actually go through with it, some mocking, some curious, and some pretending to cheer him on, only to watch him fail. And Daniel ignored them all, because this was no longer about homework. This was about pride, survival, and revenge against the man who thought he could crush him with words. He opened a blank page, his hands still trembling, his chest still heavy with the echo of laughter, and whispered to himself, "I'll show them, I'll show him." And as the words spilled into the silence, he began to type, the AI coming alive on his screen like a ghostly partner, its responses sharp, fluid, intelligent in ways that seemed almost frightening. But Daniel did not just copy. He crafted, he reshaped, he poured his emotions into it, weaving technology with his raw human fire until the assignment became something more than homework. It became a manifesto, a declaration, a weapon forged from the very tool his professor had mocked. Hours passed like minutes, and when he finally looked at the finished work, his throat tightened, his chest burned, and tears blurred his vision, because this was not just an essay, it was a mirror of his soul, filled with anger, brilliance, and truth, the kind of truth that could not be silenced, the kind of truth that carried the weight of generations who had been doubted and dismissed. And Daniel knew, deep down, that what he held was no longer just his assignment. It was a story that would not stay hidden in the walls of a classroom. Next day he walked into the lecture hall with a calmness he did not feel, his classmates watching like vultures circling fresh prey, and he placed the printed pages on the professor's desk without a word, his eyes meeting the older man's with a fire that spoke louder than anything he could say. And for a brief moment the professor smirked, certain that he was about to unravel Daniel's so-called clever trick. But as the professor read the first page, his smirk faltered, and by the second his eyes narrowed, not with amusement but with something else, something Daniel could not quite name, a mix of confusion and disbelief, the kind that makes a man question the ground he stands on. And when he reached the final page, he set it down slowly, his hands lingering on the paper as if afraid to let go. The silence in the room so thick that every heartbeat echoed like thunder. The professor looked up at Daniel, his lips parting as though to speak, but no words came, and in that silence the entire class leaned forward, straining to see what expression would break across the face of the man who had dared him. And finally the professor muttered, "This cannot be your work," his voice trembling slightly, the authority gone, the certainty fractured, and the whispers rose again, louder now, sharper, curious and hungry, the students scenting drama in the air. Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists curled at his sides, and he forced his voice to remain steady as he replied, "You told me to use AI, so I did, but you never said I could not make it better. You never said I could not make it mine." And with those words he turned and walked back to his seat, the tension in the room heavy enough to choke on, the professor staring down at the pages as though they had betrayed him, as though they had revealed something he had never wanted to see. What Daniel did not know, what no one in that room yet realized, was that the words he had written, the essay he had forged in fire and defiance, would not stay within the professor's hands, that soon it would slip beyond the walls of the classroom, beyond the campus, beyond everything he thought he knew, because someone in that room was already snapping a photo of the first page, already sending it out into the world, already unleashing a storm that would break the internet and change Daniel's life forever. And, as the professor sank back in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling just slightly, Daniel felt the first flicker of something unfamiliar in his chest, something dangerous and unstoppable, the beginning of a war he had not chosen but would no longer run from. And though he could not yet see the battlefield ahead, he could feel the weight of destiny pressing against his shoulders, whispering that everything was about to change. The cafeteria was buzzing with voices, the clatter of trays and the smell of fried food filling the air. Students hunched over their phones like it was an extension of their hands, some whispering, some laughing, some staring with wide eyes, and Daniel knew something had shifted, something he could not yet see, but could feel, in the way every head turned slightly when he passed, in the way conversations hushed for half a second, as though he carried a secret written on his face. He sat alone at the edge of the room, his meal untouched, his mind heavy with the memory of the professor's trembling voice. "This cannot be. Your work," words that had been meant as accusation, but had sounded more like confession. And Daniel wondered why the man had reacted not just with anger, but with fear, fear that had bled into his eyes for the briefest moment, fear that made no sense, because how could an essay, no matter how sharp or powerful, shake a professor like that? His phone buzzed again, another notification lighting the screen, and this time he looked, his breath catching as he saw a photo of the first page of his essay, not on a private message, not in a small circle of classmates, but posted publicly. The caption, bold and taunting, "This is what happens when you dare the wrong student," and beneath it hundreds of likes and comments stacking by the second, some in awe, some in disbelief, some demanding to see more. The world outside the classroom already reaching into his life. Daniel's pulse raced, his stomach twisting as he realized this was no longer contained. Someone had decided to ignite the fire. Someone had thrown his work into the hungry machine of the internet, and now it was alive, beyond control, beyond denial, spreading like wildfire in dry grass, unstoppable and dangerous, carrying not only his words, but the story of the dare, the humiliation, the confrontation. At the far end of the cafeteria, he caught sight of a group of students huddled together, phones in hand, their laughter sharp and knowing, and he felt it then, the sting of betrayal, because someone in that lecture hall had chosen to expose him, not out of support, but for entertainment, for the thrill of watching him rise or fall. And the thought carved deep into his chest, making his hands shake as he clenched them under the table. He thought of going to the professor, of demanding answers, but something in him hesitated, because he remembered the look in the man's eyes, the way he had held the paper like it was poison, and Daniel could not shake the feeling that the professor knew more than he had revealed, that this was no longer just about a student and a teacher, but something darker, something hidden under layers of authority and pride. That night, Daniel tried to sleep, but the glow of his phone was relentless. Every few minutes, another ping, another message. Strangers from across the country sharing his essay, arguing over whether it was real, accusing him of lying, praising him for courage, dissecting every line like it was scripture. And he lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his chest heavy, with a strange mix of pride and dread, because the world now demanded a face to match the words, a voice to claim them. And that face was his morning, came with a storm of attention, reporters emailing him, influencers tagging his name, classmates cornering him in the hallways with questions. Did you really write this? Did AI really help you? Did the professor really dare you? And Daniel felt himself drowning, not because of the attention, but because he could not yet answer the one question that haunted him most. Why did it matter so much? Why did a simple essay shake people the way it did? He went to class, his steps heavy, his body tense, and when he entered the lecture hall, all eyes turned again, silence falling like a curtain. The professor at the desk, pale and still, his gaze fixed on Daniel with something sharp and unreadable, and for a moment no one breathed, no one moved. The air charged with tension so thick it pressed against the walls. The professor finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You did not write this alone," and it was not a question. It was an accusation wrapped in certainty. Yet Daniel only stared back, his jaw tight, his silence louder than words, and something in that silence seemed to unnerve the man, because his hands twitched, his throat tightened, and he abruptly dismissed the class, sending murmurs rippling through the students who had barely sat down. Daniel remained seated, refusing to move, and when the room had emptied he rose slowly, walking toward the desk, his eyes never leaving the professor, and he asked quietly, "Why are you afraid of it? What did you see in my words that scared you?" And the professor's lips parted, then pressed shut again, his chest heaving as though fighting against chains unseen, and finally he whispered, "There are things you do not understand, things you should not have touched." The words sank like ice into Daniel's skin, cold and heavy, raising questions he had no answers for, twisting the simple narrative of challenge and defiance into something far larger, something cloaked in secrecy and danger. And as he left the room his heart pounded with both rage and confusion, because if the professor knew something, he was hiding it, and Daniel would not stop until he uncovered the truth. That evening the internet roared louder, his essay now trending worldwide, news anchors discussing the future of education, experts dissecting the power of AI, but woven between the noise were darker threads, anonymous accounts hinting that Daniel's essay contained more than clever words, claiming it echoed things that should not have been known, ideas that belonged to circles of power, whispers that he had stumbled into something forbidden. And Daniel felt the ground beneath him shift, reality bending into mystery, truth tangled with conspiracy, and, as the night deepened, his phone buzzed with a final message, no name, no number, only words that froze his blood. "You were not supposed to write that. They will come for you now." The message glowed on Daniel's screen, short and sharp. "You were not supposed to write that. They will come for you now." And for a long moment he sat frozen, the hum of his dorm room filling the silence, the faint noise of laughter and footsteps from the hallway beyond, his door reminding him that life outside still moved as if nothing had changed. Yet for him everything had tilted. Everything had shifted into a shadowy realm, where threats and whispers danced just beyond his reach. He tried to breathe steadily, but each inhale felt jagged, his chest heavy with dread, his mind racing with questions that only tangled together. Who was they? What was it in his essay that could provoke such a reaction? How could words meant as a defiant response to a professor's dare suddenly become dangerous? And why had the professor looked at him with eyes filled not with anger but with something closer to fear? He typed back, his fingers trembling, "Who are you? What do you mean?" But before he could send it, the screen blinked, the message vanishing as if it had never existed, leaving behind no record, no trace, no number, only the memory burning into his mind. And Daniel felt a cold wave of helplessness crash over him, a sense that he was being watched, that his every move was already under someone else's control. The next day campus life carried on with the same surface normalcy. Students laughing on the lawn, music spilling faintly from open windows, but Daniel felt every sound sharpened, every eye lingering too long on him, whispers following him wherever he walked. And though many came to him with admiration and curiosity, praising his boldness, asking about his process, wanting to be near him because of the fame that clung to him now, Daniel felt none of it as support. Instead he felt exposed, vulnerable, as though he had become prey in a place he once thought was safe. In class, the professor avoided him, speaking to the group with his usual clipped authority, but never letting his gaze fall on Daniel, never acknowledging his presence, and that absence was louder than words, because silence was its own kind of confession. And Daniel knew with certainty that the man was hiding something, something connected to the words he had written, something deeper than academic pride or fear of a letter. That evening Daniel walked alone across the campus quad, the sky bruised with fading twilight, lamps flickering to life one by one, and he felt the prickling sensation of eyes on his back, the kind that made his skin crawl and his steps quicken. He turned once and saw nothing but shifting shadows, yet the feeling did not leave. It pressed harder with each step, until finally he reached his dorm and locked the door behind him, his breath ragged, his hands slick with sweat, his instincts screaming that whatever had been set in motion was now moving faster than he could stop. He sat at his desk and pulled out the essay, reading it again line by line, searching for the hidden meaning others seemed to see, because to him it was simply the product of his mind and the AI woven together, anger and brilliance shaped into words. Yet as he read the sections about power, about hidden systems shaping society, about knowledge controlled and guarded by elites. He began to wonder, had he truly written those thoughts? Or had the AI whispered something into his work, something he had not noticed in the heat of creation? The thought chilled him, because if the AI had indeed drawn from places he could not access, if it had given him words not meant for public eyes, then perhaps that explained the professor's fear, perhaps that explained the anonymous warning, and perhaps that meant he had unknowingly pulled back a curtain that others had spent years keeping shut. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call, unknown number, and against his better judgment he answered, his voice hoarse as he said hello. Only silence greeted him at first, then a faint click, followed by a voice distorted and low. You must stop now, delete everything, disappear before it is too late. And then the line went dead, leaving Daniel clutching the phone with shaking hands, his mind spinning with panic and fury. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every passing car outside felt like a threat, and when morning finally came, he dragged himself to class, determined to confront the professor, to force the truth from him. But when he entered the lecture hall, the desk was empty, the chair pushed back, and a substitute stood awkwardly at the podium, explaining that the professor had taken an indefinite leave of absence. No explanation given, no details shared, just gone, vanished, without a trace. The class erupted in speculation, some amused, some concerned. But Daniel felt the floor tilt beneath him, because this was no coincidence. The man who had dared him, who had looked at his essay with terror, had disappeared the moment the story spread. And Daniel knew in his gut that the threads were tangled, that he was now standing in the middle of something far larger than an academic scandal. Later that day he returned to his dorm to find his door slightly ajar. Though he knew with certainty he had locked it, his heart pounded as he pushed it open. The room seemingly untouched, yet on his desk sat a single object that had not been there before, a plain black notebook with no name, no markings, nothing to suggest its origin. And inside its pages he found only one line written in stark black ink: "They are already watching. Trust no one." His stomach lurched, his hands shaking violently as he clutched the notebook, and in that moment the full weight of the situation crashed upon him. This was no longer about an essay, no longer about pride or humiliation. This was about survival, about secrets buried deep, about shadows that moved silently but struck with deadly precision. And Daniel understood that he had been pulled into a game he did not know the rules of, a game where betrayal lurked in every smile, where trust was a luxury he could not afford. And as night fell again, the glow of his phone lighting his face, another message arrived, different from the rest, clear and direct: "Meet me tomorrow at the old library basement. Come alone, or lose your chance to know the truth." And Daniel sat frozen, torn between fear and desperation, knowing that whatever waited for him in that basement could destroy him, or finally reveal the secret that had turned his life into a storm. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed against the skin and made every sound sharper. Daniel walked across the deserted campus, the lamps casting long shadows, across the stone pathways, his breath shallow, his pulse quick with both fear and defiance. And in his pocket the note from the black notebook seemed to burn against his skin like a warning: trust no one. Yet here he was, heading straight into the unknown. Because curiosity and desperation were stronger than caution, the old library loomed ahead, its tall windows dark, its stone walls streaked with age, the kind of place that seemed forgotten by time, its main doors locked long ago. But Daniel knew from whispered rumors that the basement could still be reached through a narrow side entrance, a door most students never noticed, and when he pushed against it, it groaned open with a reluctant creak, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of dust and secret systems. Phone light cut through the darkness as he descended the winding stairs, the sound of his own footsteps echoing against stone walls, and with each step he felt the weight of unseen eyes, the growing certainty that this was a trap. Yet something in him urged forward, a voice whispering that the truth waited below, the truth that had already begun to unravel his life. At the bottom of the stairs a dim light flickered from a single lantern placed on a table, its glow throwing uneven shadows across shelves, lined with forgotten books and broken furniture. And seated in the far corner was a figure, who'd drawn low over their face, still and silent as if carved from stone. Daniel's throat tightened, his hands slick with sweat, but he forced his voice steady as he said, "You wanted me here. I came. Tell me what this is." The figure leaned forward, pulling back the hood to reveal a woman, her features sharp, her eyes tired yet burning with intensity. She looked older than a student but younger than a professor, someone caught between roles. And her voice was low but clear as she spoke. You should never have written that essay, not because you cheated, not because of AI, but because of the words themselves. Words that were not yours, words that belonged to people who do not forgive. Daniel stared, confusion tightening in his chest, and he demanded, "What do you mean? They were my words, my ideas, I wrote them." But she shook her head, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. "No, the AI you used drew from places you cannot imagine. It pulled threads from documents hidden behind walls, from archives never meant to see the light. And somehow you wove them into something coherent, something dangerous. Do you understand now why your professor reacted the way he did? Why he vanished?" The room seemed to tilt, Daniel's mind racing, because deep down he had felt it. The strange weight in the words, the sense that some lines carried more than his own thoughts, that some knowledge had slipped into his writing from a place beyond him. And the woman's words only confirmed his fear. "Then tell me who they are. Who is watching me?" he pressed, his voice breaking, his desperation. Roshi leaned closer, her whisper like ice. "They are the ones who control knowledge, who decide what the world is allowed to see, who guard the truths that could tear systems apart if revealed. And you, by accident or fate, wrote something that echoed their secrets. And now you are marked. You cannot go back to being just a student. You are a threat to them." Daniel's chest burned, anger surging through the fear. "Then why call me here? Why warn me? If you know who they are, then tell me how to fight back." His words echoing in the cold basement, his fists clenched at his sides, but she only sighed, her expression torn between pity and resolve. "Because you remind me of myself. I once tried to expose them. I failed, and I paid the price. Now I live in shadows. But you have something. They fear. You have the eyes of the world on you. And that makes you both powerful and vulnerable." Before Daniel could reply, a sound cracked through the silence, footsteps heavy on the stairs, slow and deliberate. The woman's eyes widened, in alarm, her hand gripping his arm as she hissed, "They found us. You have to run." And in that instant the lantern flickered, shadows twisting across the walls, as three men emerged from the stairwell, their faces half hidden by masks, their movements calm, controlled, dangerous. Daniel's heart thundered as the woman shoved a small flash drive into his hand, her whisper urgent, "This has pieces of the truth. Take it. Do not let them catch you." And then she pushed him toward a side door hidden behind shelves, the masked men closing in, their voices cold and firm. "You should not be here. Give us what does not belong to you." He stumbled into the narrow passage, his breath ragged, the woman's voice fading behind him. Then a sharp cry of pain, the sound of struggle, his gut twisting with guilt and terror. Yet his legs carried him forward, through twisting hallways, up broken stairs, until finally he burst into the night air, his lungs burning, the flash drive clenched in his fist like a lifeline. The library, looming behind him like a monster that had almost swallowed him whole. He ran across campus, every shadow now an enemy, every sound a threat, until he collapsed in his room, locking the door, his chest heaving, his body shaking with the weight of what had just happened. And when he looked at the flash drive, he knew he now carried something far heavier than words, something people were willing to kill for, something that had already drawn blood. Sleep was impossible. The memory of the woman's eyes haunting him, the sound of her cry echoing in his head, and Daniel knew that he could not keep running, that soon he would have to choose, to face the storm head-on or be consumed by it. But first he had to see what was hidden inside the small piece of metal in his hand. First he had to know the truth that had cost her freedom, perhaps her life. And as he sat in the dim glow of his computer screen, trembling but resolute, he slid the flash drive into the port, the screen flickering, files opening with names that made his blood run cold, documents stamped with seals of secrecy, reports that spoke of experiments, surveillance, manipulation of information, truths buried under lies. And in that moment Daniel understood the weight of the war he had stepped into, a war far beyond essays, far beyond classrooms, a war between those who controlled truth and those who dared to reveal it. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room, casting Daniel's face in pale blue shadows, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, his breath uneven, his chest heavy with the weight of choice, because opening the files meant stepping deeper into a war he barely understood. Yet the flash drive burned in his hand like a key he could not ignore, a key to a door that once opened could never be shut again. With a shaky inhale he clicked, the folders spilling open, each labeled with cryptic names, some with numbers, some with phrases that carried the chill of authority, and inside were documents, reports stamped with words that screamed secrecy, red markings across the margins, classified, restricted, unauthorized access, forbidden. And as he scrolled through page after page, his stomach twisted, because the words were not just theory or speculation, they were records, evidence of experiments on communities, manipulation of information spread across nations, proof of knowledge hidden and weaponized. There were reports of entire histories rewritten, events silenced, truths erased, stories buried, so deep that no ordinary person would ever know they existed. And in the margins of one file he saw phrases that echoed lines from his essay, almost word for word, and his blood ran cold, because it meant the AI had not invented those ideas. It had pulled them from here, from the shadows, and by writing them Daniel had unknowingly shouted their secrets into the light. His hands trembled, his vision blurred with disbelief and fury. "This is why they fear me. This is why they want me gone," he whispered to himself, his voice raw, his chest burning with a mix of terror and rage, because now he understood that he had become a threat, not by choice but by accident. And yet accidents could not be undone. The words were already out, the internet already alive with his story, and silence was no longer possibly sudden sound. Outside his door snapped his focus, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, the rattle of the knob as though tested, and his heart slammed against his ribs, panic flooding his veins. He yanked the flash drive free, shoving it into his pocket, killing the screen, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps paused, silence pressing in, then fading slowly away. But the message was clear. He was being watched, every move measured, every choice stalked. Sleep never came, only the haunting memory of the woman's cry in the basement, the masked men closing in, the weight of the flash drive in his pocket, like a brand. And by morning Daniel knew he could not keep this secret alone. He needed someone he could trust. But the notebook's warning echoed in his mind. Trust no one. And yet trust was the only weapon he had left. He thought of his closest friend, Marcus, the one person who had stood by him before the fame, before the dare, a friend who had defended him when others mocked, but doubt gnawed at him. What if Marcus could be turned? What if even friendship could be corrupted in a world built on lies? Still, the burden was too heavy, and so Daniel reached out, whispering into the phone, "I need to see you." But no one can know. They met in a quiet corner of the old gym, dust floating in the shafts of light from broken windows, and Daniel's eyes searched Marcus's face for any sign of betrayal, but all he saw was concern, confusion, loyalty carved in worry lines. "You look like hell, man. What's happening? People are saying you're in trouble, that the professor disappeared because of you," Marcus said, his voice steady but edged with fear, and Daniel's throat tightened as he pulled out the flash drive, his words pouring out in a low rush. "This isn't just about me. This is bigger than anything we ever imagined. These files, they prove things they don't want anyone to know." Marcus listened in silence, his brows furrowed, his eyes dark with shock as Daniel spoke. And when Daniel finally handed him the flash drive, Marcus held it like a live wire, his voice hushed. "If this is true, then you're in danger, real danger. But maybe together we can figure it out. Maybe we can get this to the right people." And Daniel felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, that he was not alone, that he had someone beside him in the storm. But hope is fragile, and danger moves swiftly. Because as they spoke, a sudden crash shattered the silence, the gym doors bursting open, masked figures storming in, their movements precise, controlled, efficient, and Daniel's blood turned to ice as Marcus shoved the flash drive back into his hand, yelling, "Run!" his voice raw with urgency. And before Daniel could protest, Marcus turned, swinging a rusted bar from the floor at the intruders, buying seconds, maybe minutes, enough for Daniel to sprint through the side exit, his lungs burning, his legs fueled by desperation. He ran across campus, the world spinning in blurs of shadow and light, voices behind him shouting commands, the thud of pursuit pounding closer, and he veered into the science building, slipping through hallways, bursting into stairwells, until finally he found himself crouched in the dark of a storage room, chest heaving, heart hammering, the flash drive clutched so tightly in his hand it cut into his skin, and tears stung his eyes as the sound of struggle and shouting echoed faintly from where he had left. Marcus' minutes felt like hours, the silence that followed heavier than any noise, and Daniel knew with sick certainty that Marcus might not walk free, that his friend had chosen to stand between him and the shadows, and the guilt carved deep, but with it came a fire, a rage that hardened his resolve, because if Marcus had given him those seconds of freedom, then Daniel had to make them mean something. He had to survive. He had to finish what had begun. He slipped out of the storage room, the campus eerily quiet, and he moved like a ghost toward the edge of the grounds, his mind racing with the weight of choice. Where could he go? Who could he turn to? The professor was gone. Marcus was taken. The woman from the basement likely dead, and yet the flash drive pulsed in his pocket, a burden and a weapon both, and Daniel knew there was no turning back. He reached the city streets beyond campus as night fell, the neon glow of signs flickering above him, strangers moving past with indifferent eyes, and for the first time he felt truly alone, swallowed by the immensity of the world, yet carrying a secret that could tear it apart. And as he slipped into the shadows of the city, one thought anchored him through the storm of fear and grief. They wanted him silent, but he would not be silenced, not now, not ever. The city lights blurred as Daniel walked deeper into the night, the flash drive a weight in his pocket heavier than iron, heavier than guilt, heavier than the fear crawling in his veins. He thought of Marcus's face, the defiance in his eyes as he told him to run, the sound of chaos echoing behind him, the silence that followed, and every step Daniel took was fueled by the vow that his friend's sacrifice would not be wasted. The shadows stretched long across the streets, neon flickering above shuttered storefronts, whispers of strangers brushing past him like ghosts, and yet Daniel moved with purpose now. No longer a student caught in an accident of fate, but a man chosen by circumstance to carry the unbearable truth, his chest a furnace of rage and determination, his mind racing with one question: how to bring the secrets in the flash drive into the light without being silenced before they could burn. He found himself at a worn-down internet cafe tucked between two abandoned shops, the smell of stale coffee and overheated electronics filling the air. A few late-night wanderers hunched over glowing screens. Oblivious to the storm Daniel carried, he sat at a terminal, sliding the flash drive into the machine, his fingers trembling but his jaw set, and as the files opened again the weight of their meaning crashed over him, evidence of manipulation, of lies dressed as truth, of a world shaped not by freedom, but by chains invisible to the eyes of ordinary people. The temptation to upload everything at once surged through him, to scatter the truth across the web like fire across dry grass. But reason held him still, because reckless exposure could mean the files would vanish as quickly as they appeared, deleted, buried, discredited, and he realized he needed not just release but protection. He needed amplification, something that could not be erased, something that once seen could never be unseen. So Daniel began to write, his words flowing like blood from a wound, pouring confession and discovery into a manifesto that bled with urgency, a story of betrayal and courage, of how a professor's dare led him into the labyrinth of lies, of how his writing uncovered hidden truths buried under decades of silence, of the cost he had paid, of Marcus taken, of shadows that hunted him. He wrote, not just for himself, but for every nameless soul crushed beneath the weight of deception. And as he wrote, tears blurred his vision, yet his hands did not stop. His grief shaping every line into fire. By dawn, his words were complete, thousands of them woven into a single truth that burned brighter than fear. And with a single breath, Daniel began to upload, spreading the files across multiple servers, encrypted clouds, hidden forums, mainstream platforms, each release tied to his manifesto, so that even if one was cut down, others would rise. And as the progress bars filled on the screen, he felt his chest break open with both terror and liberation, because the point of no return had been crossed. The door of the cafe creaked open, the sound of boots on tile, and Daniel knew before he looked that they had found him. The masked figures stepping into the glow of the monitors, their movements sharp, mechanical, efficient. Yet Daniel did not run this time. He did not hide. Instead, he stood, the flash drive clenched in his hand like a relic, his eyes blazing with defiance. You can silence me, but you cannot silence the truth anymore. His voice rang raw and unshaken, echoing across the empty café, moved toward him, swift and unrelenting. But even as they closed in, Daniel saw the screens behind them fill with notifications, messages, reposts, retweets, his manifesto spreading like wildfire across networks, each second multiplying, each second slipping beyond their control. And in that moment, Daniel realized victory was not survival, but impact, not his life, but the truth's immortality. And the files were no longer his alone. They belonged to the world. A strike came fast, a blow to his chest, sending him crashing against the terminal, pain tearing through him. But through the haze of agony he smiled, a broken yet victorious smile. Because even as his vision dimmed, he saw the words still glowing on the screens, still spreading, still alive, and he knew Marcus had not died in vain. The professor's disappearance had not been for nothing. The woman's cry in the basement had not been swallowed by silence. Their stories were now threads in the fire. He had lit the masked men, dragged him from the cafe, the city still half asleep around them. Indifferent, unaware, yet somewhere phones were buzzing, screens lighting up with Daniel's words. Ordinary people staring at truths they had never imagined, some dismissing, some fearing, some awakening. And like ripples in a vast ocean, the effect spread, unstoppable, irreversible. For truth once seen could not be unseen. They threw him into the back of a van, his body weak, his breathing shallow, yet his heart steady. Because though he did not know if he would live another hour, he knew he had already won. The system that thrived on silence had been pierced, its secrets dragged into the light. And the lesson carved deep into him was clear. Sometimes survival is not about living, but about ensuring the story outlives you. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to make others see what was hidden all along. As the van carried him into the unknown, Daniel closed his eyes, not in surrender but in peace. His final thought a whisper to Marcus, to the professor, to every soul that had suffered unseen. We are not forgotten. The truth is free now, and no matter what they do to me, the world will never be the same again. In the end, Daniel's journey was not about a dare, or fame, or even survival. It was about transformation. About how a single act of courage can shatter chains woven over generations, about how truth burns brighter than fear, and though the cost was everything he had, his sacrifice turned silence into fire, leaving the world forever changed. The end.